And then he came back and he entered a lifelong journey of construction work. And he was a local union member, local 108 and 122. They've changed out of Springfield, Massachusetts. So I grew up with dinner conversations about how his work went. Sometimes there were some accidents on the jobs. I've heard some stories about that. And he worked on a couple of jobs where there were fatalities. So I decided to dedicate a background of science, specifically industrial hygiene, to helping folks stay safe, specifically folks who working in labor, but I do try to help everybody, but it seems like labor wants to do the greatest right by their workers as far as protecting them. So that's typically why I end up on the side of unions. With that said, I'm really excited about this program that the IUPAT is creating, because as I understand, your labor organization thus far, I think that you can really be a leader in promoting this ICRA training for the trades. And you've got a really good training network across the country and in Canada. And I think, everybody's going to be able to add some to this. And as Ken said, this is a living training program, especially from the side of the COVID-19, because new information comes out every day. Some of it gets better tailored. Like, for instance, we now know that this is absolutely transferred by airborne transmission. But new information just on that fact keeps getting posted. So we want to make sure that this is updated. So please go back and always look at what the most current offering is for the program. And you can see on this intro slide, we do have an updated, it says IUPAT version 3.0, updated 5/26/2020. So every time an updated one gets posted, you can look down there and see the most current one. With that said, what do we do next?
I'm gonna, so Bernie, I'm gonna give a chance so you can kind of hear their names and the district council they're from. And I'm just gonna go down the list that I got here in front of me that's on the participants. So I'm just gonna go in that order. So we'll start with, looks like I got Debbie Lee Stevens as the first one on here.
Good morning, everyone. Debbie Stevens, District Council 16.
Gary Whitaker.
Hello, everyone. Gary Whitaker, District Council 16.
James Sullivan.
Hello, everyone. James Sullivan from District Council 35.
Harry Mowry.
Hello, everybody. I'm Harry Mowry, District Council 16 in Reno, Nevada.
Michael, I'm probably going to butcher your last name, Morshi.
Yeah, you butchered it.
I knew I would.
Yeah, it's Mike Moreshi.
There we go.
District Council 35, Boston.
Chuck Nagy.
Hi, this is Chuck Nagy, District Council 16.
It keeps moving on me here. Jose.
Good morning, everyone. Jose Cisneros, District Council 16, glazing instructor, San Leandro.
Nuno.
How's everybody doing? Nuno Portala. I'm a health and safety coordinator with DC 711 out of New Jersey.
Juan Burnell.
Good morning, everybody. Juan Bernal from District Council 9, New York.
Ken Klaus.
Hello, everybody. Kenny Klaus, upstate New York, District Council 9.
Sean Love.
Sean Love out of DC 35.
Omar Robinson. Omar, you're on silent.
Good afternoon. DC 9, New York City.
Let me go back on this thing because it keeps moving around on me here. So I think I might have got everybody. Did I miss anybody? I know Christian is trying to get on from DC 5. He is not on there yet. We're trying to work those details out. So as soon as we can get him on, we'll get him on there.
And Ken, I just resent him everything, so he should be good to go again.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Oh, it looks like he is.
DC 77 out of Atlanta.
Frankie, I didn't see your name on there. Anybody else?
Yeah, me also. Pete Grillo, DC 9, local 1087, Blazers.
Yeah, that's what's happening. That I'm trying to go off the participant list here, and it keeps moving around. So I apologize for missing you guys. Anybody else that I missed? Nope, doesn't sound like it. So Bernie, we'll just we'll go into and give a kind of a maybe a background of the COVID stuff and the importance of having an awareness behind it.
As far as pertaining to the course that we have here, Ken, or just in general?
Just in general, I think we just started out in general, so they kind of have a foundation of where we're headed to.
Okay. Yeah, so initially this course came as a COVID-19 / ICRA class, infection control risk assessment that CPWR put together. And they did that because it's important to keep the COVID in there because this is connected to some auxiliary funding that they got through their hazardous waste worker training grant that's funded under NIHS. But in addition to that, we decided to put in an infectious disease module in and of itself, because ideally COVID-19 is just one infectious disease out of many, many, many. And ICRA is going to be applied to controlling all of those in different settings, healthcare, hospital, et cetera. But the COVID-19 one has its own module because that was paramount in being able to connect to the funding. But as far as why COVID-19 obviously is important right now, not just because we're in a pandemic, but there's been so much misinformation out there. I've done a few webinars and presentations for the IUPAT already. One of my biggest goals and concerns is trying to get the straight science and the actual facts about this out so folks can, make their decisions, because we've gotten terrible centralized federal messaging on battling this pandemic. And that's unfortunate. So one of the things that this connects to, it's not just protecting yourself and your family from COVID-19, it's protecting others that you know. And down the road, really, it's connected to keeping job sites open as well. As different states have started to loosen up their stay-at-home orders and such, some have went about it in a more cavalier route, others have not. And we're seeing the ones that have sort of just opened up without good planning in place, they're starting to have new spikes. And the concern is that we're going to have a second peak during our first wave of this pandemic. So we're in wave one. We've already had one peak. We started to go down. Now it looks like in many states, up to I think 20 at this point, we're starting to have resurgences in the numbers. And what's been typical in history of infectious disease epidemic and pandemics is the second peak is sometimes worse. So we don't want that to happen. And this is different than the second wave that could happen during the fall or winter. We've had a couple of instances where construction site jobs specifically have been shut down because a number of workers and workers' family members have tested positive for COVID-19, and they had to shut it down. Ford Motor Company, you might have seen last week, they shut down their newly reopened line in one of their factories because they had a couple of workers test positive. And we've said this before on a couple of our webinars and in meetings. It's not just a safety hazard yourself that you're dealing with. So let's say, are you setting your ladder up correctly? Are you going up it? Are you using 3 points of contact? Is the scaffolding set up correctly? So that might affect, 2 or 3 people. Are you welding? And so that might affect yourself and a few people around you. Those are more controlled geographical worksite hazards. This is something that can potentially affect the whole entire worksite or a whole community. So it's really important that we keep putting the right information out there. And if you have the opportunity to pass this information on to your members at the local level, it's going to go a long way for protecting them, protecting their families, and keeping job sites open. So right after we have an infectious disease portion of this module, we're going to have a dedicated section just to COVID-19. And then I guess I'll say at this point, once COVID-19 pandemic subsides and we control it, and the CDC, WHO decide to use the phrase, we've controlled it and it's no longer a pandemic, that module in here can just go underneath the infectious disease module. So it'll only be 2. You'll have infectious diseases and ICRA. And probably we'll keep COVID-19 a little bit more robust in the infectious disease module because it's so brand new and it's likely to be around in our minds and affecting us for some time. But it'll just work its way down to 2 modules. And really, you could take the infectious disease one and teach it on its own if you want. And just another point that Ken mentioned, the difference between doing this online and in class. We developed this so that it can be done in both ways. You'll see that, you know, some of these activities might work better if you're doing it in a group face-to-face setting, such as, you know, you got 4 groups of 5, you assign the activities, you say, okay, you know, just decide amongst your group who's going to be the recorder, who's going to report back, how you're going to split up the questions that you have to answer and research those, etc. But, all right, what's next, Ken? We're making this up as we go. We're figuring this out.
No, I think we just go to we go to the next PowerPoint and we go straight into the presentation. But let me give an opportunity for Christian. Just got on the web, so he should be on here. Can you state your name and the district council you're from? Christian, you should be on.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
This is Christian Wagon from Western Partitions. I'm in District Council 5 and a part-time instructor for IUPAT.
Thank you. That should be everybody. So let's move into this. You guys can use the chat if you have questions. This is a 6-hour program. We're doing a train the trainer in the 4 hours, 2 today and 2 tomorrow. So understand the fact that if we're going past some things fast, we're just trying to reach those important things that we really think you need to know to hit home to our members. So keep that in mind also. Okay, Bernie.
Yeah, okay. And with that said, if it was face-to-face, it was originally designed as 8 hours. And if we're doing it on the webinar format, it's going to be 6 hours. And you got to try to stick towards that because that's part of the counting requirement for the CPWR for the part of the grant funding. Obviously, you don't want to sandbag anybody. If you've got a smaller group and you don't have many questions and you finish up in 5 hours, so be it. But it is designed, as Ken said, to be 6 hours online and 8 hours in face-to-face. All right, so I'm just going to say next slide. We're going to go through, and anytime something comes up that is either of importance for a trainer, I'm going to make sure I try to point that out. And let's get going. All right, so the goals of this, we got 3 goals because there's 3 separate sections: infectious diseases and how to reduce the risk, the COVID-19 pandemic specifically, and then the infectious control risk assessment or ICRA procedures. And again, this is all at the awareness level. And the intent will be at some point to be able to develop a trainer course where you're actually doing all the ICRA stuff hands-on. You're building and designing containment systems of different kinds, you know, reviewing construction plans and determining what your different risks and such are, et cetera. But for now, it's just at an awareness level. Next. So these are just some of the class participatory rules. And again, you know, if you're used to doing something a certain way, you know, so be it. These are just some general ones. The first one, though, it's a class, even though we're online, so it's not a webinar. So as much as you can, you know, try to involve the students with doing things. And that's what the intent of these activities are, even though we're doing this online and we're going to be using the breakout rooms. All right, next. So it's going to be delivered in 3 sections, day 1. And this is specifically you know, for this train the trainer. So we're going to look at infectious disease awareness and COVID-19. Day 2 will cover ICRA. And I think that you can actually split the class up that way itself once you teach it in the 2 3-hour sessions for, you know, just participants. I think that should work just fine. But again, you know, wherever you end off, you can just pick it up the next day. And the other option that you've got, if you are running behind on time, you can decide how to cut some of the activity, the participatory stuff down a little bit. So maybe instead of having, you know, every group answer each question, maybe you just assign 1 question per group, and that's going to cut down, you know, on the amount of report back and such. But however you want to manage it, you know, you get through from one day to the next and conclude the 6 hours. All right, next. So after this section, these are our goals or training objectives. Define what infectious disease is, explain the chain of transmission. And that bullet right there, that goal is one of the most important things for infectious disease understanding. And we have a final activity that's going to kind of ensure as an instructor that the students got what you were putting forward. If they get the chain of transmission, they're going to be able to implement controls to prevent infection from happening. That's most important in this COVID-19 pandemic. It's important in risks in the ICRA itself. And then we're going to have them list a few things and that they're going to be able to explain. And some of the things I put in here specifically are focusing on cutting through the BS that might be out there so that they understand the differences. Like, what's the difference between an outbreak, a pandemic, and an epidemic? These are all important pieces of information that if workers understand, they're going to know why they should put on a face covering if they're out and about. They should know why they should listen to, you know, Dr. Fauci or Dr. Birx when they're talking about what to do to protect your family and your community or work site from this stuff. So we've got those goals up there.
Next, Bernie, and as you guys as instructors at chain of transmission, if you guys really understand that and really believe the fact that this is true stuff here, and Bernie's right, that's really what you want your members to understand, because we could all be carriers, and understanding how that chain works, we could be one of the ones that help flatten that curve.
Yeah, and just as a side note, so, you know, Ken and I are going to be interjecting with each other. So we're sort of team presenting this, as you will, which is a fun way to do it. All right, next.
You guys are going to do a great job.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. We just met each other yesterday.
Yeah, right. So infectious diseases, this stuff's been around for a long time. I got a couple examples up here. You know, everybody remembers the Black Plague. They've all had this in, you know, high school or junior high, stuff like that. But infectious diseases have been responsible for wiping out whole populations throughout history. And one of the issues with these new diseases that you might have heard to them described as novel or new is that nobody's got antibodies to them yet. So it's the same example of Europeans bringing over some disease, you know, on a tall ship and infecting a tribal population on the Americas. No antibodies, no immunity to those diseases, and it would literally wipe out populations. So these things have been around for a while. Next slide. So over the past 100 years, you know, we've referred a lot during the COVID-19 pandemic to the 1918 Spanish flu. You know, that killed a lot of people worldwide. There's been a lot of things that have been sort of picking up speed, if you want to imagine a train just leaving the station. Since 2000, we've been adding more and more resurgences of diseases that we thought we've controlled. We've been adding brand new diseases that we're just discovering, and we're starting to have trouble keeping up. You know, we've planned for terrorism events and things like this and all hazards events since 9/11 pretty readily. And I've been involved with a lot of those things since 9/11 at the federal level, helping actually different unions do their part to prepare. And it's always been on the forefront. We've discussed pandemic flu from some avian route because it's going to wipe out things. When we were looking at avian influenza, we were looking at models that said up to 60% of everybody would be down and out. They would be sick and recovering. They were on their deathbeds. But imagine 60% less firefighters, cops, nurses, doctors, teachers, grocery store workers. And here we are. Obviously, we now have proof positive that a pandemic can cripple an entire nation, and it's in fact crippled the world. So it's really important to get an understanding that these things don't just happen once in a while now. They seem to be having different outbreaks and epidemics, and in some cases, a few pandemics are happening more and more readily. And there's some information as to why that might be happening, but we can get into that after. Next. Oh, I see a question. How do you guys want me to handle the chats? Save those for after or keep going? Yes. So that's a question from Jose Cinereros. Yeah. So air quality does have a lot to do with infections. And this is a large question, but I'll try to answer it with a couple of examples. As the planet's heating up, as we're going through, you know, global warming, infections are taking more and more foothold in different areas that they might not before. So that's an issue. We know that where you live, the general outdoor air quality is associated with transmissibility of certain infectious diseases, and also your risk of how bad the symptoms are going to be. We know that if you live in a spot with bad air quality, COVID-19, you are more likely to suffer more devastating symptoms or die of COVID-19. And we've been finding that COVID-19 is actually attaching itself to PM10, particulate matter size 10 microns and above particulate matter. That's a form of air pollution. So that's a bigger picture. Now let's go down to the indoor environments that we work in. Absolutely, air quality is very important. If you have bad indoor air, your likelihood of getting infections of all kinds of things goes up, as well as your severity to those. That's why it's really important if you are operating a training center right now, if you haven't been maintaining your building as if it was full of people, you have to go through a reopening process to make sure that all those mechanical systems, the HVAC, the water system, you don't have leaks. All those things are operating in good repair. Very important. The American Industrial Hygiene Association put out a guidance document on doing such a thing. And I think that's been shared in the IOPAT world at some level. I just can't remember which webinar or that we put that out. But yeah, good question. All right, so we got emerging infectious diseases and re-emerging. So, you know, some of these things are emerging. So they're brand new, COVID-19. SARS was an example of emerging disease. So these are things that are brand new and that are coming out. Then we've got re-emerging diseases. So these are things that we thought we did away with, but now they're starting to come back. Polio is an example. I thought that was gone, but no, that's started to come back. Outbreaks of measles. I think folks in California had an outbreak of measles either this past year or 2 years.
Yeah, I don't have my camera. I took my camera off.
Right? So we have to make sure that, you know, we're staying on top of both of these sets. And the concern is if the re-emerging diseases are coming back at a high clip, and we've got emerging diseases coming out at a high clip, that is going to overload not just our healthcare system, but a lot of our critical infrastructure, like grocery store workers, you know, truck drivers. If we've got 60% less, you know, long-haul truck drivers transporting different goods, you know, through our interstate routes, we're going to be in trouble. So it's important to keep an eye on both of these. Next. This is just a great map that shows you the scope that we're in right now. These are re-emerging and emerging infectious diseases. Newly ones are in the red, and the purple or blue are re-emerging or resurging diseases. These are things just in 2017. There's a lot on the board that we have to deal with. Next, please. SARS was an example of a recent one, acute respiratory syndrome. Came out of China in 2002. This spread to 37 countries. So this was an example of how fast this stuff can travel. And we're so mobile now, place to place across the whole globe. Makes it very difficult to contain these things once they get out. Next slide.
We got is everybody seeing the slides that are up there or not?
Yep, I'm seeing
I
them.
see it.
Yes, we can see it here.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah.
Might be your screen, Harry.
Check your view options on the top of your screen, Harry.
Sorry about that, Bernie.
That's okay. We'll look something up here.
Okay, Bernie, we can go ahead and move forward, and Harry will work on getting his slides up, so we can continue.
Okay, this is another example of something that's come out in 2014, MERS, another example of a upper respiratory infection. It's also called Mideast Respiratory Infection Syndrome. Next. And again, those are just two examples. Another one that's been coming up, I heard somebody chime in and said that they were from Boston, so I'm in southern New Hampshire. You know, we had an issue in the Boston area last year of pertussis or whooping cough coming back. And so that was an issue with, you know, with their kids. And so that was something that was re-emerging we had to keep a close eye on.
We got a poll up.
Oh yeah, here we go. So so we decided to do this as a poll. So go ahead and fill this out. which of the following are diseases? Click all that apply. And then once you're done, go ahead and hit submit. Now, speaking to, since this is a training course, who is operating the poll right now?
Donna and Alice.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, Donna's operating that one.
all right, they're the wizards behind the curtain. So as you're doing this, especially if it's, you know, the first or second time, you want to try to get a team of folks to deliver this course so that you've got somebody set up for checking the chat, you know, things like that, handling the polls, technical difficulties, all that stuff. All right, so do we have, we all set? What do we get for an outcome for our poll?
I don't know if they're all in yet. They might not be.
Yeah, so this is something, if we're doing it, there we go, face-to-face class, you know, I would just have folks work on this as a group, take 5 minutes, discuss amongst yourself. So we got Ebola, nobody for broken arm, nobody for headache, good. Alcoholism, West Nile, okay. All right, so it looks like everybody's not in agreement. So Ebola is a disease. So a disease is defined, we got it there, underneath the National Institute of Health definition, a condition that impairs normal tissue function. Broken arm, it's a condition, it impairs normal tissue function, but it's not considered a disease because it's acute. A headache is not considered a disease. However, a headache might be a symptom of a disease. Alcoholism, that is a defined disease underneath the CDC. Does anybody have an example of one of the diseases alcoholism causes? It is in itself a disease, but it's got a secondary disease. What was that?
Liver disease?
Yeah.
Cirrhosis,
liver disease.
cirrhosis of the liver.
Cirrhosis of the liver, fatty liver, yep. West Nile virus is a disease. Common cold is a disease. Seasonal flu, mental illness. That is now considered a disease underneath the National Institute of Health. And asthma, which I have. That is a disease. All right, good. All right, any comments or questions? Not, we can move on. And one of the things you can do, you know, down the road, let's say if you're teaching this and you've got some new emerging diseases that are out, or you've got something specifically that's hitting your local area, you know, you can go ahead and just modify it and throw those in there.
Those are, everything's considered a disease on that page with the exception of the broken arm and the headache?
Correct. Yep. Mental illness is a tough one because that was, I don't know if it was a couple years ago or a little bit farther back, but it was finally recognized as a disease because we know that what your mind starts to promote can actually affect your tissue function. Just think about getting scared and how your heart rate goes up, right? Because we're basically a walking chemistry set. But it's a disease that you don't often see. And in fact, the IUPAT, I learned from our director of training conference that we did a few weeks ago, has an excellent program that speaks to mental illness and caring for it. Good question. All right.
Check out the Helping Hands on IFTI.
Yes, thank you.
Just give it a plug.
I don't know all your acronyms yet. I'm getting there though, Kevin.
I got you.
Help.
We're good. We're good.
Mental health first aid is also in there.
Yep.
What's that?
Mental health first aid.
Yes. Yep. All right, here's another activity. So here's the NIH infectious disease definition. So an infectious disease is a disease that is caused by an invasion of a host by an agent whose activities harm the host tissues. That is, they cause a disease and can be transmitted to other individuals. That is, they're infectious. So we've got another poll for this one, I think. Yep.
Yes.
So which of the following are diseases? Click all that apply. So remember, we're looking for, so this should be which of the following are infectious diseases. So we're looking for infectious diseases.
We've got to make a change on that slide, right?
Yeah. So which of the following are infectious diseases? Everything on there is a disease. Oh, I got to hit submit.
And again, like we said at the beginning, there's some on this particular call that has some background on Zoom meetings and all. So, you know, we'll ask at the end if you guys would like us to share the information with all of you of who's been on the phone, and we're good with that. Then I think we share that information, and then the instructors could, you know, work together on putting out some of these classes.
That's a good point, Ken. And one thing to think about, I know, you know, is if you can seamlessly transition from doing these courses that are appropriate from face-to-face in a classroom to online, it's going to be a big benefit to your locals and district councils, because this is going to come back again. And when it's not COVID-19, I can guarantee you we're going to have another epidemic, or God forbid, a pandemic is going to happen again in our lifetime. Again, if you just study how these newly emerging diseases are coming out, they are coming out at an overwhelming speed. We don't have enough resources to study these right now in their countries of origin.
And just so everybody knows, we did this as a poll question. You could actually do it as a breakout. Yep. The key on webinar-based training is, even as the classroom, you want to break it up, right? You don't want it to be the same constantly all the way through. So you want to break it up in some of the different types of scenarios, kind of like you would do in a classroom.
Thanks, Ken. And you'll notice down here, and it was on the previous slide too, anywhere where we have an activity, there's a little toolbox down at the right, just to kind of jog as a, you know, for the students and also a trainer. All right, do we have results? Inquiring minds want to know.
We're having a little trouble with the poll because of our login. So we'll see if we can get those results to you.
Oh, I have a question.
Yeah.
Let's say if we move on, can that poll be brought back up at any time, or does it have to stay with the slide that you did it on?
If the poll, if you come back to the poll, it usually relaunches.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So
I have a question. When this slide comes up, does that poll automatically come up, or you have to launch it yourself, right?
Yeah, we have to actually launch the poll. So part of the problem, Donna and I are both logged in as Finishing Trades Institute, so we're canceling each other out. So we're having trouble getting the poll to stay up on the screen.
And that's good to know, Alice, that if you have two people that are registered underneath the same Zoom account and as the host, then that maybe could potentially become an issue when you're teaching a webinar-based training. That's great.
Yes. To know. Yeah, for sure. We're experiencing that now. So.
Yeah, and this is one of those instances that if we can't get it, then, you know, we just keep pushing forward.
Yeah, and we might be able to get it later through a report. So
yeah, let's go to the next slide.
Looking for it.
Well, I'll just fill it in so that we know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine.
HIV is an infectious disease that can be transferred from person to person. Heart disease, not an infectious disease. Even if you throw a barbecue every day for your family, it's not an infectious disease. Malaria is. Alcoholism is not. West Nile virus is. Tuberculosis or TB is. It's very infectious. Seasonal flu is. Mental illness is not. And asthma is not. However, some of these things do have genetic precursors that might make you more susceptible to some of these diseases, but it's still not considered an infectious disease. Okay.
Bernie, Mike Mareshi has his hand up. Mike, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just gonna make a comment on the host and the responsibilities that the host has. So if there's one host and you make anyone else that you want a co-host, they'll have the same tools that you have, and so that keeps things clean. You know, so if Alice is the host and she makes Ken and Bernie and Donna and Nicole co-host, they'll have access to the tools.
They
but
can't.
that's
They
what we-
can. You just have to make sure you check it off in the settings.
Yeah, but you might. I don't know. I've been doing that stuff on the fly in my Zooms,
Yeah.
so it works.
Yeah. I think we'll have to experiment a little bit more with it, but thanks for that. We'll check that out.
Okay.
Yeah, it's great to know. Thank you very much.
Just for my own info, how did you see that Michael had a hand up? Was it over your picture?
In the participant list, it had I can't remember exactly what it said, but it said, I think it said Mike Marishi's hand was up or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, if you go underneath the participants list, there's a section on there that says raise hand.
Okay.
So so I'll push mine and now my hand's raised.
Okay, but I can't see that if I don't have that open, right?
That's correct.
Okay, yeah, gotcha. All right, cool. Look at that, we're building Rome as we speak. All right, next slide.
Next slide, okay.
So this is the big one for the infectious disease module, chain of infection. It's the cycle of the pathogen infecting a host and causing disease. So when folks understand this, they're going to be able to implement proper controls at certain parts along the way to prevent infection transmission. So click again. I think I got another thing that pops up here. There we go. So we want to break the chain of infection. All right, next. Microorganisms can cause infectious disease, and there's 6 forms. They got bacteria, viruses, fungi, mold. You might be used to mold. Protozoa. Hemolyths are worms, gross, and prions, which are infectious particles that consist of only a protein. They're not, I don't know if they would be considered alive or not, but they can do quite a bit of damage. So there's 6 forms that microorganisms can come. You can also refer to those as infectious agents. Next. So now the few slides that we just covered, this here's an activity to let students have some ability to look some things up and put all these definitions together. Because again, it's important for them to understand this. So what we would do is for each microorganism form, list 1 pathogen and disease. So we've got bacteria, viruses, fungi, protozoa, hemolyths, and prions. And I think for this one, we're gonna go into breakout rooms, correct?
Yep, that's gonna be our first time, so bear with.
We're gonna go out breakout rooms, but you know, it's gonna take a little bit of research. So, you know, you might have to look on either your phone, the internet, or some place to actually maybe go get the questions for these. So be prepared for that.
And as an instructor, right, so I printed one of these out and I put my own definitions in. I filled out all my own responses. So that, you know, might be a good idea. You do this on your own as an instructor, come up with one of these, have a paper-based version. I like to have that preferably, but any way you want to do it, so you have a few things that are ready to go. I think what we'll do is I will answer these questions in general for an instructor tool, but just know that some of these things like this activity, there are a lot of different potential, you know, answers that students can come up with.
And then in the breakout rooms, if we could get one person to be the lead person within the breakout rooms, kind of like what we would do in a classroom, right? We would say pick a leader that would, you know, run the breakout room and then report back when we come back. That would help us out. If we could get just when you go to your breakout room, if somebody would just step up and be that person would be great.
Right, and then the person, Bernie, Ken, in the group, you'll have to share your screen within the group. All right, let me see if this works.
Uh-oh.
All right, so it should say you're being asked to join.
Looks like there's one more. Oh, it's the FTI.
Hey, yo. So are we trying to fill something out or just come up with a quick answer for each
Yeah, so let me, oh, I thought I was going to be able to share my screen.
I think at the bottom middle, there's a green arrow pointing up.
Oh, share screen. It's right in front of me.
Yep.
Okay, here we go. So this, I'm not sure if this is the right one.
There you go.
Is that it? Okay, yep.
Yeah.
All right, so that, we already did that. And we already did that, so this is the one that we're looking at. So does somebody want to be the leader or the note taker? Any volunteers?
I have a screen up with Google open, so
Okay.
I can tell you if you can. I can't drag and drop the answers in there, but it says a bacteria is a large group of unicellular microorganisms which have cell walls but lack organelles and an organized nucleus, including some of which can cause disease. So I don't know what you got from that. A large group of unicellular microorganisms. I think that's probably sufficient.
So what he wants you to do is provide an example of a pathogen and disease for each of those. So for
oh, okay.
Example of a pathogen and a disease.
So E. coli, I think, is a bacterial disease, I believe. And I think the pathogen is it animals or meat? For E. coli? I don't even know.
Let's see.
Blood-borne pathogens couldn't, I mean, anything to do with blood, I guess, right?
Yeah, it says bacterial diseases include any type of illness caused by bacteria, including E. coli, salmonella, food poisoning, Heliobacter pylori. I don't know what that is.
So
how to spell that.
salmonella would be an easier one with food.
Meningitis is in there too. Gonorrhea is in there. And then I think that's enough examples for bacteria.
Yeah, all right.
A virus disease example.
COVID-19.
COVID-19, flu, measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox, hepatitis, shingles, herpes, cold sores.
Measles, mumps, and rubella, right? MMR.
Yep. Measles, mumps, rubella. Okay, fungi. What do we got? Fungi disease examples. Different human illnesses, poisonings, parasitic infections, and allergies. Ringworm. Yeah, ringworm, athlete's foot.
Is that for fungi?
Fungal infections, yeah.
Okay. Ringworm.
Fungal diseases.
What was the other thing you said?
Athlete's foot. Yeast infections. Parasitic yeast cause candidiasis. I don't know how to say that. But yeah, it seems like it's more of a topical thing, you know, on the skin. Except for ringworm, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
On surfaces too. That's why you gotta wear flip-flops in a public shower.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, so now a protozoa. Are responsible for diseases that affect many different types of organisms, including plants, animals, and marine life. Many of most are deadly human diseases, including, dysentery, malaria, the African sleeping sickness. I don't know what that is. Interesting.
African sleeping
Sickness. amoebic dysentery, and malaria.
Is
Oh,
that
you
how I
got
say?
it.
Is that how you spell dysentery?
I don't know. That's it's D.
Close enough. It's phonetic.
Yeah, there you go. It's DYSENTERY. There you go. Okay, and then we got, what's the next one?
Helminths.
Well, they want a
we-
pathogen too, don't they?
Yeah,
So
we need a
mosquito could be
pathogen.
on there.
Oh, okay. Let me see. Protozoa.
A mosquito for malaria for sure.
Oh, something that would carry it.
Yeah.
Okay.
We don't know what the African sleeping sickness is, so.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
No.
Okay. Moving on. Helminths. Roundworm, lymphatic, varicillus, or filariasis. Oh, these are long. These are long words.
So roundworm. We can say that.
Roundworm, yeah. I'm still digging. I'm trying to find a more simple. Hookworm, whipworm, a lot of worms. Oh, these are the worm ones. Duh. Okay. Those would be carriers. It causes helminthosis, worm infection. There's some other ones. Let's see what else I got.
Okay.
Anemia, I think because it eats your food, doesn't it? Or something like that. It eats the food that you're trying to get, so you get malnutrition, anemia.
That's a tapeworm.
Oh, okay. Oh, tuberculosis, HIV.
Is helminth?
Yeah, apparently. Let's see. Oh, wait. Chronic immune responses, increased susceptibility. Oh, it increases your susceptibility to others' symptoms. So it's not necessarily from that, but it could lead to it. I'm trying to dig a little. This one's a little bit kind of hard to navigate. Let's see. Neglect.
All right. Our time's about up.
All right, one more. Let me get one. I'll get the last one then. We'll call that one good for now. And then the last one's the protein one, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So from that, you can get
Parkinson.
Hodgkin's. Oh, these are all the brain ones, huh?
Yeah. Parkinson, Alzheimer's.
Parkinson's.
Yeah.
What's the Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease? CJD. These are all the named after diseases.
GSS. FFI.
What's the pathogen for Alzheimer's?
I don't know. I wonder if
I think it's
I wonder,
genetic, isn't it?
I thought so too. I wonder if what's the one that starts? Well, I wonder if polio would fit in there.
Oh.
No.
Nah.
Maybe.
Find out. He might know.
Okay. I think we gave it 110.
Okay. All right. I think so too. So let me see if I know how to get us out of the groups. It's a good question.
Normally they're on a timer. I don't know if they did that this time.
Yeah, I mean, I timed it just. All right, I'm gonna see if I can leave the breakout room. And
If you look the bottom right corner, it might say leave or exit.
You folks weren't waiting on my group, were you? Alice, you're muted.
Yeah, you see my mouth moving?
Yeah.
I gave everybody a 30 seconds, so it's probably about
okay. I learned how to leave a breakout room.
So once I actually end the session, it says all breakout rooms will close in 60 seconds. So
okay.
Even when you click it to close the breakout rooms, it gives you 60 seconds to get out.
Okay. Yeah, so that was more than enough time. We actually went into some of the other ones on the list that, other than that, we were assigned.
Yeah, we kind of did all of them.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so interesting things are happening, but I don't know if you see, do you see the results?
No. Which results?
I see poll results.
No, I don't see those.
Oh, it tells me attendees are viewing questions. Interesting. So that was, okay, well, let me see if I can share the results of that.
Yep,
of that
we see it.
Do you see it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see it now.
Yeah.
And then Alice, okay, I think you got everybody out of the rooms now.
Yeah, I closed the rooms and it gave me 60 seconds. So when 60 seconds was up, they would all have been taken out of the room anyway. Okay, so there are the results of that second poll that we took.
Yeah, so after doing this kind of activity, having people list it out, I like the poll idea for this Zoom method. I think that was nice.
Yeah, and the nice thing, like say you're looking at these results, you can relaunch the poll and gauge everybody at the end of the session with the same question if you chose to.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So, okay, I'm going to stop sharing those results. And then go back to the PowerPoint. Oh, you know what? Okay, well, this is interesting. Definitely a little learning curve here, guys. So thanks for being patient. And gals. Okay, can everybody see the screen now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So now coming back, I would just, ask somebody, the class, what'd you come up with for an example of, bacteria? Let somebody answer and then say, anybody else have one they want to add? And then go on to the next one, virus, fungi, protozoa, etc. And then you can truncate that depending upon how you think you're doing on time. Anybody come up with anything interesting?
We did for bacteria.
Okay, what'd you pick?
Salmonella.
Ah.
And I'm not sure if we got the pathogen, but it says it's an intracellular pathogen. Yep. Does that make sense?
So it's a bacteria.
And the disease is salmonellosis.
Yep. Yep. So salmonella is a form of a bacteria, and you went one step further, and there are different types of bacteria by species. So you're able to find that as well, and then you found the disease it causes. Yep.
And then we had Legionella, which was the bacteria, another intracellular pathogen, and the disease causes pneumonia. There's pneumonia. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So I ended up picking Legionella myself as an example, just because it's something that's important for us returning to our buildings and such. But, there's so many options for folks. You might want to designate somebody, to look something up on the fly during this. If you've got face-to-face training, you can ask somebody to help out with that who's another instructor. Anybody else come up with any interesting ones? No?
Aye.
I heard somebody.
If I could ask real quick, I saw where Ken was saying about the idea of a connecting activity where you have like a word connecting activity. And I like the sound of that. That sounds pretty good. Where you associate, you connect maybe the pathogen and the disease.
Yep.
Yeah. Just my input on that. I like that idea.
And you bring up a great point. I think Bernie hit on a little bit at the beginning. These are suggestions that we've put on here. If you want to adjust the question or how the question's asked or how a poll is asked within the group and within your setting, do that. It doesn't. There's nothing on here that says you have to exactly do it the way that we're doing it. We're giving you an idea of how to do that.
All right, should we move on here? I see we got 210. So this is just, so I'm going to go through a couple of slides here. Infection results when a pathogen invades the body and starts to grow, and so then you start to have some issues. So in order to cause a disease, the pathogen must enter the host body, adhere to specific cells, invade and colonize tissue, and start to infect damage. Next.
Bernie,
Yeah.
There was a question, and I think it's a legit question because we're going to have some members when we tell them to go look up this information that might get lost on where to go to look at it, right? So they're just going to freeze without going to Yahoo, Google, whatever. They're going to freeze. Is there something that we can maybe push them to, an area that we could push them to so when they do their research, at least they're halfway there or partway there?
Yep. So there's just some common like word search connectors, like things that I'll look up is I'll say common diseases bacteria cause, or bacteria causes these diseases, or examples of diseases bacteria causes, and that's what my search phrase would be. And then you got to know where you're going to look stuff up, right? You don't want to go to Dr. Kevorkian's website. You want to go to something that is legitimate with good information. So what I'll do, in my research, if I'm looking for diseases, I want to look for places like CDC, WHO, the National Institute of Health, etc. So that's where I'll go to make sure that my information is accurate.
And please don't use Wikipedia because it can be changed by the public.
Yep. All right, next slide. So virulence describes the infectious agent's aggressiveness. So, so you can click, I got some photos that come up as an example. Click again. So how aggressive is this stuff? Difference between two activities, playing chess, wrestling. One more and I got an example. So common cold, virulence versus Ebola. So one of these things might cause you to take a day off of work, maybe not. The other one is going to cause your internal organs to start to lose their integrity and leak. Virulence is very important because the more virulent something is, the more harm it can potentially cause to the host. If you take that fact and then you lump that with transmissibility, so if you've got something very virulent or aggressive and it's easily transmissible, we've got problems, right? Because you're going to now attack hosts at a much greater clip. The other issue is you can influence virulence, just like you can influence poisoning by chemical exposure. The more concentration you have in the air of a certain chemical, the more likely you are to be affected by it, right? So if we look at doctors and nurses and folks who are caring for patients with COVID-19, those rooms are loaded with COVID-19 virus in the air. So the concentration is so high, they're getting smacked by this virus at such a high clip. Their bodies don't have time to adjust and try to fight it and develop antibodies. So they're getting COVID-19 in a much more aggressive, more virulent way than if it was the average person walking around, went to a grocery store, picked it up from someone, not wearing a face covering. So you can influence virulence as well. So Ken, that's my son.
That's your son. I was going to ask if it was you or your son.
No, I wish I was that young. He loves throwing, so most of my fun shots of him are throwing somebody. All right, next.
You gotta love Greco-Roman wrestling.
Love it. So reproduction number, this is another important thing for folks to understand because it helps cut through some of the BS that you might have heard in the very beginning of this. Oh, COVID-19 is just like the flu. Well, no, it's not. Seasonal flu has a reproductive number of 1 to 2, depending upon the season. COVID-19 has one of 4, and I picked this one as a conservative number. New research shows that it might be as high as 6 or 7. So what the reproductive number means, how easily it's going to spread. So a reproductive number of 4 means one person is going to infect 4 people. So imagine how that can spread. So then those 4 people go infect 4 more people, and they go infect 4 more people. So something like 1.5 is nowhere near as infective as something that has an RO of 4. And then you put that next to something like measles there, its RO number is 18. So one person is going to affect 18 people. And then those 18 people will each go and infect 18 more people. So understanding the reproduction number of an infectious disease, I think goes a long way for the general person's understanding of how dangerous it might be. Next slide. A reservoir is, for a pathogen, is basically where they live. So it's where they normally live and grow. So I got an example there of a dirty duct. And unfortunately, that duct on the left that you see on your screen is typically what I see when I do HVAC investigations. People don't maintain their ducts. I got a couple photos here of outdoor environments, swamps, places where mosquitoes breed. How many people here like to go fishing or hiking or something out, at this rate, mowing your lawn, tick season, right? Got an example of crowds there, or of a water fountain, Legionella, we talked about that. So a reservoir is a spot where you might be able to find that pathogen growing and living. Next slide. Water can also be a reservoir for infectious disease. Next. Here's the example I talked about. I don't know if that hotel is in business anymore. Oh, go ahead. Vectors, so these are living organisms that can transmit infectious pathogens between a human or from an animal to a human. This is an example. Mosquitoes, they're evil. They can transmit, they're a vector for a lot of different pathogens, a lot of different types of disease. This is just a short list of diseases caused by one specific type of mosquito. Next. Zoonotic diseases, so illnesses that can spread between an animal to people. And this is what really concerns us, because a lot of times these emerging diseases start from, monkeys, bats, swines, rodents, birds, and at some point they evolve into being able to transmit to a human being. These are the top 8 zoonotic diseases of national concern in the US. So influenza, salmonellosis, West Nile virus, you can see the rest. I pulled this from a document. So finally, the FDA, the USDA, and I think the CDC combined efforts and created a zoonotic disease document. I actually have that, and I can put that up on the, is it called the instructor portal?
Instructor Lounge.
Instructor Lounge. Thanks, Ken. It's a really good document. It's long, but it's got a lot of information. So I like to impart to trainers, if you're not an expert in something, but you're used to training on a certain topic, as long as you can answer questions 1 or 2 deep. So for instance, zoonotic diseases are illnesses that can spread between animals and people. And then a student says, well, Ken, what kind of animals? Can you give me an example? And maybe Ken can come up with an example. And then they might ask another question on top of that. That starts to get back to 3 and 4 levels deep. That can be more difficult. But if Ken's comfortable answering the first and second question, that's great. And the way that you can prepare yourself to do that and feel comfortable doing it is just to read more material on the topic that you're presenting and give yourself time, or make sure that your organization is giving you time to adequately prepare for training. So one of my credentials is I'm a certified environmental trainer. Now I think they switched it to, it's called a certified instructional technologist. And that was originally developed under the National Institute of Safety and Health Trainers Association. So it's a credential to basically make sure that folks understand not just what they're trying to teach, but that they have the methods, the adult ed methods for doing that. And what that organization recommends is if you know the material well, you should still put in about 4 hours for every hour that you're going to teach. So if your module is 2 hours and you know respirators really well, you should probably put in 8 hours of effort going through materials, going through your slides, seeing if there's anything new about respirators, et cetera, to prepare you for teaching. It's a high bar, but it's one that's really going to make you confident and let your students know that you know what you're talking about as far as the material that you're given. Let's see. And if anybody's interested in becoming a certified environmental trainer, let me know. I can pass the information on to you to how to go through that process. Next slide. Portals of exit are routes by which infectious diseases leave the body. So there we've got some examples. Next. How infective agents are transmitted, keys to their spread. So direct contact transmission, so you're touching the stuff. Indirect transmission, so maybe somebody bleeds or coughs on something you pick up, and then you touch your eyes or your mouth and you transmit it that way. Droplet transmission, so you're breathing or you cough and the large droplets are going to get on somebody and that'll make their way to mucous membranes. Or also airborne transmission, which is the doozy. That's the one that we hope is not the route because it spreads the easiest and it's the hardest to control. Yes.
And I think a lot of people don't really understand that with this COVID-19 that's out there, that it is airborne transmissible. Yep. And I don't think it's taken as serious as it should be.
Yep.
Because of that. Yeah.
Absolutely right. Next slide.
Just real quick, Bernie. So if it's airborne, and they say that it only lives for how much time while it's traveling through the air?
Current studies are up to 16 hours.
Because I've heard that from the time that it starts, if it started in China, it takes time for it to get across to where we're at now, right? Does it actually live that long when it's traveling through the air to actually come here? Or is it actually coming through contact of airplanes and getting transmitted that way?
Good question. So it resides in a reservoir and it comes across the ocean. What reservoir do you think it resides in? Somebody traveling on an airplane, a human being. So to answer your question, it doesn't survive in the air that long from going from, say, China to the United States or to Britain. But somebody gets infected and then they get on a plane. They are multiplying that virus in their body and they are coughing, breathing, talking, laughing on the plane. And then they get out and they continue to do that. So that's how it gets there. But it can survive in air up to 16 hours, studies show. So if you are infected and you go into a restaurant or a bar and you're coughing, right? And you're getting your particles out in the air, it's going to float around in that air and be infective for potentially up to 16 hours. But even if it was only infective for up to 2 hours, think of all the people that might be coming through that restaurant in that time where they're floating around the air. That's why face coverings are very important. And respirators as a worker are very important if you have to work in close contact with people.
And that's why that's a great question, Bernie. I just want to add the fact that even if you don't think you have it, you could have it asymptomatic, right? So when they're saying wear face covering, even though you feel healthy, the point is that you might not be, right? So that's the reason for the face coverings and respirators and all that.
Yeah. Yep, and I'll get into face coverings in a little bit when we look at COVID-19, but they're not the same as an N95, but they do offer some protection if you were concerned about you breathing in those particles, but they also offer some protection if you're sick and you're breathing out those particles. So then if everybody puts them on, you're increased protection because the person who's sick has a face covering, the person who's not sick has a face covering, so you further reduce your risk. wearing a face covering is really about protecting your neighbor. You know, it's really about protecting those folks that when you go out in society, you're not passing on something that you might have, or you're at least reducing your risk to it. And if everybody does it, we reduce the risk even further. So we'll get into that a little bit more when we talk about airborne transmissible, because it's very important to understand that. In protecting your members on construction sites, it's very important to understand the airborne transmissibility. So vector-borne diseases, a human illness caused by a parasite, virus, or bacteria that transmit it. So here I got two common things right now for the summertime. We got ticks and mosquitoes. And now I realize how much I hate insects. All right, next, next slide. So a vehicle is an infectious disease, is an inanimate intermediate in the direct transmission of a pathogen from a reservoir or an infected host to a susceptible host. So contaminated, seats on a train or bus or something like that could be an example of a vehicle. Your buffet, which I have no idea how that's going to work anymore, is an example of transferring. Somebody gave the example of salmonella, right? Buffets are notorious for transfer of salmonella. Bathrooms, bathroom stalls, walls, handles, right? So these are examples of vehicles. Next slide. So what happens at 2 meters when somebody coughs? So large things that are, around 10 microns to 50 microns or so, they're going to start to fall and drop off fairly quickly. So if you've got a mucus, droplet or saliva droplet, and you've got a virus in it, that's going to fall to the ground fairly quickly. This is an example of contact or droplet transmission, where if that contaminates a tool, an object, you touch it and then, touch your mucous membranes, you can transmit it that way. Or if the droplet is just small enough to stay suspended in the air within 6 feet, you can potentially get that on you or breathe that in. The problem is when we get things that are airborne transmissible, so these things get smaller and smaller and can carry that virus at a longer distance. And the virus can survive in that smaller saliva droplet. Now, I've said before on a couple of webinars that I did for the IPAT, that a particle that you breathe out or sneeze out or cough out, whatever, are going to lose half of its volume within 1 second. So as soon as you sneeze out, half of that stuff is going to shrink to half of its size within 1 second. As soon as that's happened, whatever doesn't attach to a surface or hit the floor is just going to get up and float around, right? So it's going to be suspended in the air longer and longer. So next slide really can bring this topic home. Actually, I got to move my little thing here. So we see that aerosols that are less than 10 microns are going to be, come out sooner, and they're going to be able to be suspended on the air. So we've got the different size ratios. So things that are very large are going to start to fall out between 1.5 meters and 2 meters. Things that are very small are going to go for more than 6 meters. So now we're talking like 25, 30 feet. The stuff is going to be able to go on the air. And as you cough, you're producing something at a great speed. So we've got studies that show that your coughing projectile is about 10 meters per second, which is very fast. If you sneeze, it can be as many as 50 meters per second. So that's why you see those pictures that are frozen of somebody sneezing. You see this really violent, projection of saliva and mucus. It's going at a very fast speed, which helps it to project at those larger distances.
I've heard that those come out at about 120 miles an hour.
Yeah. Yep. So it's very important to understand what kind of transmission that virus is likely to be promoted through, and then understand that these, different sized droplets and particles that you breathe, talk, sneeze, or cough out can stay in the air for a very long time.
And that's a good point, Bernie, with that too, because all we hear right now is 6 foot. All we see in stores is 6 foot markings, right? Well, think about what that 6 foot was based on, right? And where COVID-19 is at. So, just keep that in mind, that's a way to lower risk, but yet you can understand that somebody sneezing or coughing 26 feet's a big distance.
Yep. And the issue with COVID-19 is the virus can stay in those smaller particles and be live. Even though viruses technically aren't live, they can be infective or effective in transmitting its disease in smaller particles, which means it can travel farther. It can stay in the air longer. The 6-foot rule is hogwash for COVID-19. It's airborne transmissible. 6 feet is not enough. Finally now, we've got, experts from the CDC finally starting to say that, and even their language is too soft. They're saying, well, apparently it looks like 6 feet might not be enough. But if you look at other epidemiologists and infectious disease experts and folks who study respiratory aerosol and disease transmission that aren't bound by the Trump administration, they're speaking freely, and they're saying 6 feet is nowhere near enough. And the best that I can tell you is the farther away of somebody that, you can get from 6 feet, the better. Because again, you don't know if somebody's sick or not. They might have the disease and carry it, and they're showing no symptoms. Next slide, please. Portals of entry, or a doorway for pathogens into a susceptible host. So we've got these up there. Next, please. The final link in the chain of infection is a susceptible host. There's some diseases that can just affect anybody regardless. You don't have to worry about being susceptible to it because everybody is. Other things, you might have to have immunocompromised system, etc. And then sometimes you might have a spectrum. So like with me with asthma, I'm not more susceptible to be infected to COVID-19, but the aggressiveness of my symptoms or my outcome might be worse because I've got asthma. But it doesn't mean I'm more likely to catch it than somebody who doesn't. Next slide. There's 5 periods of infection. So the incubation period is that time when you're starting to, you initially get infected with disease and it's starting to multiply and use the energy and your tissue to multiply. And then as we start to cross the border, we get into the primordial phase, which is when you can become infective. And then we get the period of illness where your symptoms are really pronounced. They're preventing you from doing normal activities. And then the period of decline, we start to get better. And then the period of convalescence where it's really, that recovery phase and you're feeling good. So if you want to click next, I've got some basic phrase examples. So you can see, these phases or periods sort of intertwine with each other. They're not direct cutoffs. So I'm infected, I'm starting to feel sick. Okay, I'm really sick now. I've got, the ice pack on my head with the thermometer and I'm laid up on the couch. You start to feel better and then you can get back to normal. And diseases have different time frames associated with all of these phases. One of the issues with COVID-19 is the recovery period. So that time when you first pronounce symptoms to when you're all better is lasting up to 20, 25, sometimes 40 days. We've had people in a hospital. And the normal flu is you're usually good to go in 10 days, right? So this is another way that this disease is affecting us at a different rate. Next slide.
Just a quick question on that slide beforehand. That one might be a good one of those to do the connect together the words, maybe put together on those.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Here's some barriers to invading pathogens. So we've all got, some ability, non-specific physical and chemical defenses, an innate immunity. Macrophages are designed to destroy a lot of things that invade our body. And then you've got some adaptive immunity. So maybe after you get sick and your body fights it, it leaves behind some antibodies to prevent infection in the future of that same pathogen. Next slide, please. So again, this is sort of like a summary. So understanding the different parts of the chain infection are going to help us break it. So here's some example of different ways to break the chains of infections along the way. Cleaning and disinfection, keeping away from things, hand hygiene, first aid, wearing PPE, etc. So there's a bunch of ways that you can introduce interventions to break that chain. Next slide, please. Infectious diseases are covered by these main agencies in the US. All right, so in the future, maybe we could just, I'll eliminate the transitions there and have those all at the same time. Next. The NAID infectious disease categories are category A, B, C, and then emergent infectious diseases. So these are different things that they give priority to and what they're trying to publicly promote and also direct research funds to. Next. Components of infectious disease occurrence have different categories. So outbreak, an illness that happens in unexpected high numbers. It may stay in one area or extend a little bit more widely and can last, from days to years. Epidemic, then we start to see more people get it. It expands to a greater geographic area. And then finally we get to pandemic, where the disease outbreak spreads across countries or continents and affects more people and takes more lives than an epidemic does. So we've had, a lot of these things over the past few years at different levels. Next. So WHO has a pandemic alert system with 6 phases, from phase 1 to 6. So viruses in animals caused no known infections in humans. Then we have what we consider zoonotic transmission, where it goes from an animal to a human. And then we start to get all the way down to phase 6, where at least 1 or more countries in a different region from phase 5 has community level outbreaks. Next slide. Epidemiology is the study of disease within the population. It helps us to prevent and control infectious disease outbreaks. The CDC has an official definition there. And then if you click again, it talks about what epidemiologists do. So they apply principles to try to study diseases and prevent outbreaks from happening. And then finally, we get a couple famous faces here. We got Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx, who we should all be listening to. And they're basically disease detectives, epidemiologists. And there's a lot of minutia behind what they do. So, as a graduate level studied industrial hygienist, I had to take a graduate course on epidemiology and biostatistics. I understand it. I understand how to use the information that they give me, but I'm not qualified to go and do all the things that they do. That would be a whole different graduate degree that I decided not to do. And it's very important work. And this covers everything from studying the outbreaks to doing things like contact tracing, which are very important for chasing down diseases. So they're basically detectives. Next slide, please. How can we prevent infectious diseases? So folks are pretty much familiar with this. Next slide. There's a difference between quarantine and isolation. So this is, again, some language that people might have heard of through the COVID-19 pandemic. And you just want to make sure that people are understanding what these two different things are. So quarantine restricts movement of an otherwise healthy person so that they don't go out and get sick. In isolation, you separate a person who is sick and you keep them isolated from the population. So these two things can work hand in hand together to prevent transmission. Next, please. Breaking the chain of infection can potentially affect many folks. Note to self, Alice and Nicole and Donna, I think I might put this one right after the RO slide. But this was first published by the New York Times, and you can see what happens if you had just an RO of 2, right? So one person's going to infect 2, and then that person will go out and infect 2, etc. You can see what happens if you broke the chain of infection just between you and one of your 2 people that you might infect. I mean, look at all those potential lives you might encounter for the better, right? By doing that. So it's really important that we prevent the spread. Next slide. And I think this is, okay, so infectious disease resources for folks. And then the next one is pretty cool, thanks to our counterparts in Canada. So this is Canada's pathogen safety data sheet. You can download it as an app. You can go to the website and use it. It's very nice. I played around with it online, but I haven't downloaded it to my phone yet. But you can basically look up different types of pathogens and show information and get information about them. So this might be something, if I was doing a face-to-face class, I would probably either show this up on the screen or I would ask folks to download it and do an activity with them. Or if you happen to have a training center that's got a computer lab, you can do that as well, because this is a great tool to use for looking information up. You could even tie this back to the infectious disease activity that they did, where they looked up a disease from each pathogen. So there's a bunch of ways that you can play around with this if you have the time to do so. Next slide. And this is our final activity. So this is activity 4. What it is it's a fact sheet that the CDC put out on dengue fever. You want folks to review this, and then they're just going to answer a couple questions about the chain of infection. There's 5 questions. And by doing that, I would feel comfortable that your students understood what the chain of infection is and that they'd be able to, use it to help break the chain. Any comments or questions thus far? So for sake of time, do we want to try this activity together or just go through? I think
let's go through it.
Okay, I think if we pause too halfway through the COVID module, that the ICRA one will be able to get through it without a problem doing anything that we didn't get to COVID and finishing ICRA tomorrow.
Exactly.
Sound good?
Yeah, you're good, Bernie.
All right, so how do we decide to do this one? Because we printed it out for everybody. So we're just going to leave this screen up, and then folks are going to do this on their own, or are we going to breakout groups?
We were going to do breakout rooms. We can do it however you like. It might be easier if everybody has it. I just would want to know if everybody has it. It was emailed to them to make sure they have it, because it's it's 3 pages to read, or 2.5.
It was short, and Bernie, I think we sent it on short notice too, so I don't even know if anybody had a chance to actually read through it yet. But if if we were doing a typical class, we would probably schedule the participants a week ahead of time, and then they would have a chance to read. So.
All right. So I can pull the document up if you want to just go over it as a whole group.
Yeah, let's do that, and then that'll give Bernie a chance to run to the restroom. Yeah, and if just as a note, if I was doing this face-to-face class, I would just have everybody read this at their seats in their groups and then discuss it in their seat, fill out the questions, and then talk about it as a whole class after. All right, folks. So
Do you see it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's up there. So if the ones that's here, if you take a few minutes to read what you can in there, then we'll get to the document as soon as Bernie gets back here.
Well, I'm glad you decided to put it up, because I'm looking through my email and I'm not seeing it there.
It probably came from FTI International. I think Nicole sent it this morning.
It was at like 9:50, Harry. It's an attachment.
Well, Harry, you were
Attached to
added
the
late,
email.
so I emailed you late, specifically from my email.
Well, I believe that you emailed it, but I'm not seeing it over here.
No problem. I'll resend it real quick while we're doing this.
And Nicole, I had a virus attached to one of my emails, so I closed that whole account. So the email my business email is harry@dc16jttf.org.
Got it.
Okay. And I think I see it 10:15. Come on, what is going on?
Do you guys need me to scroll down?
Hey, Bernie.
Yeah.
I sent you a message.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Hold on. You looking on your phone? It's coming again. I texted it to you.
So do you guys want to review this? I mean, I can't tell if I scroll, I don't want to miss anybody. So somebody want to read it out loud or just paraphrase it? Each of the topics?
Yeah, so I mean, I think maybe for time I could just sort of go through and fill in the answers for folks. Does that sound good?
Let's do that, Bernie. That
Yeah,
sounds great. Yeah.
So again, you know, this is a pretty good activity, though. It lets you know that your students, you know, picked up what you were laying down as far as chain of infection. They can pick information out. And this is a fact sheet written by the CDC. So, you know, they can do that. They'll be able to do it, you know, for anything that the CDC creates, basically. So the reservoirs were humans and also monkeys. So back to the issue of, you know, somebody talked about, you know, how does the COVID-19 get from China to here? Human reservoir. So with dengue fever, humans can be a reservoir for it. Portals of exit would be skin, and there's a vehicle that's used, a vector, which is mosquitoes. So basically mosquitoes, you know, bite somebody who's infected, goes and bites somebody else that's infected, and it can that's not infected, and that's how it can transfer. So that's the portal of exit, would be skin via mosquito bite. Modes of transmission would be the mosquito as its vector. Portals of entry through skin again. Boy, now that I'm reading this out loud, it's not very exciting. But anyway, skin, the answer is skin. Factors in host susceptibility. So this is one where there's universal susceptibility. So there's nothing that's going to prevent somebody from getting it. So even if you had it before, you can get it again. You could be immunocompromised. You could be completely healthy. It's universal susceptibility. And all those answers were found directly in the text. Any comments or questions? So, I mean, again, based on the class, so I could ask the question here. So folks, based on that, based on knowing that the portal of exit is the skin and its transmission mode is a mosquito, how could you break the chain of transmission for dengue fever?
Using deep base pest,
all the mosquitoes.
Yep, a couple of ways there. What else?
Keeping standing water from being around you.
All right, so keeping water from staying around you, what type of control is that on the hierarchy of controls, Ken?
I would say that in engineering control there, wouldn't it be? Or yeah, I think it would be an engineering control.
So an engineering control is some type of intervention that removes the human being from the hazard.
Right.
And what does elimination do?
It could be elimination also.
That's a tricky
I would
one.
say that's more than the engineering, correct?
That's a tricky one. It's right on the border. So getting rid of the source of the water that a mosquito would breed in is the best way to do it. So that's even better than, you know, some of the other things like putting on long clothes, maybe an administrative control. I know, at least in New Hampshire, if I go outside and mow the lawn at 4 p.m., I'm going to get attacked. But if I mow it in the hot sun at 11 a.m., not so much. That's administrative control. So you can even create this activity to go a little bit further by talking about the chain, I keep saying train, the chain of transmission, and how, you know, your members can put in place the hierarchy of controls.
Yeah, Las Vegas was having an issue during foreclosure in the 2008-2009 era with the houses going in foreclosures. Nobody was taking care of the swimming pools. So the swimming pools would get to a point where the mosquitoes were just awful.
Yep.
You know?
Yep. Yeah, so I'm good. Anybody else? No? Okay. All right, well, we got about 10 minutes, 12 minutes left, so we're going to get on. That was the end of day one. Any comments or questions about, you know, facilitating the infectious disease module? No? Okay. And again, once COVID-19 comes to an end, we'll button it down. You're going to see it now, and we'll throw that under infectious diseases. So we'll have to make room for a new module on the next emerging disease. Fun. All right, so number 2, we're going to get into the second section, which is COVID-19. So we're going to explain some basic facts of COVID-19. They're going to want to assess workplace exposures and their risk and define some key steps for worker protection against infection. All right, moving on. I'm going to go through this one fairly quickly. I updated a lot of what the CPWR slideshow was, because that came out, I think, sometime in early April, I think, and there's so much stuff has been updated about it. So I'm going to just go through. We can go to the next one. People have seen this one already verbatim. Coronavirus. So this can be a range of stuff. Again, you could be infected. You could have no symptoms whatsoever. But shedding, so shedding means the virus is starting to use up the energy in your cells and damage your tissue, and it's making itself available to replicate and move on to infecting other cells or get disseminated and transmitted to infect other people. Then we've got some mild flu-like symptoms, and then we've got some severe respiratory distress and death. And this has really been showing some bizarre stuff. I mean, we've got symptoms now of multi-inflammatory syndrome, which was only seemingly affecting children, where they were getting significant rashes all over their body. They were feeling like they couldn't breathe at all and passing out. And we thought that was only affecting kids. And I just had a case in New Hampshire of a fit 30-year-old ex-military person who died, and the underlying cause was that multi-inflammatory syndrome from COVID-19. So this thing is just presenting with new symptoms, it seems like, week to week. Next. This is a map that, well, I want to say current, but this was current as of 5/20. You've probably read the news, but as of the 26th of this week, we have surpassed 100,000 fatalities. We continue to add about 2,000 fatalities a day to COVID-19. And we're starting to see, again, increased outbreaks in up to 18 or 20 different states now. So, who knows where this first wave is going to end. But we're still in the thick of this. I guess, Ken, you could say we're probably in the third round of a 12-round match.
Exactly.
Bernie, real quick, are those cases that you're saying you're saying there's added 2,000 deaths a day for COVID?
Yeah.
Is that strictly COVID,
Yeah.
or is that like underlining deaths also, like people that have underlining diseases or whatever?
Good question. No, so those are just COVID-19 related fatalities. And to get those values, and this is a good actually segue for this, so thank you. To get something on a death certificate, we really have to depend on the medical examiners in the state for which that death occurred. And unfortunately, we found that some states' governors are interfering with the medical examiner practice. For instance, Florida, that governor was telling medical examiners to stop listing COVID-19 as a cause of death for a while. And luckily, some good reporters found that out. We also found out that there was a woman who created a computer modeling and information website for Florida, and they asked her to stop presenting the truthful cases, and she said no, and they fired her. There are some other states, Arizona is one where the governor asked, or I should say demanded, that the state-run universities and colleges stop tracking and modeling COVID-19 cases and fatalities. And we have some examples of other states doing this. So it's really important, depending upon where your district lies, to understand what kind of information your state government is putting out. Is it valid or is it fudged? Because this is very important, because you're only going to get that occurrence based on its State Department of Health and Human Services, which is connected to the medical examiners, which are the ones who will list the fatality cause. And it's the State Departments of Health and Human Services, which will list a cause of sickness, which would be COVID-19. So it's really important to know, because the reason why this is important, not just to protect your members and their families, but if you're gearing up to go to a job, a construction site, and it's at a state where the numbers aren't true and valid, your members might be walking into a hotbed, and they're not going to know.
Hey, Bernie.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you why, like, if you look on the map there and you see Montana, for example, is that just because it's sparsely populated, that
Yep.
their numbers are so low where it's surrounded by all the other states
Correct.
that are much higher?
Correct. Correct. So they've got sparsely populated areas, but this virus is making its way through everywhere. And unfortunately, some folks in those sparsely populated areas think it's not going to come from me. I don't have to worry about it. That's a big city problem. But once it infects your community, it is there. And unfortunately, a lot of those places do not have a robust medical center like you might see at Mount Sinai in New York City that's going to be able to handle an outbreak that's localized to their community. And in fact, North Dakota, I think, is one of the states, sparsely populated, but they're starting to have a pretty sharp increase in cases. So much so the governor there has been pleading with people, everybody, please wear a face mask if you go out in public, because if this ramps up more, we're going to be overwhelmed. And much to the other gentleman's question, I think, was it Jose? The problem with battling an overwhelming tsunami of COVID-19 cases is other diseases and medical issues aren't getting attended to properly. So you're still having other fatalities of other diseases and issues, but they're getting increased because there's only so much you can do at hospital, right? And there's also a fear factor. We know that some people are getting sick, including having mild heart attacks, which turn into a fatality because they're afraid to go to a hospital because they might get COVID-19.
Right.
So this is like having a domino effect because it's so massive, and the response of our medical community is the requirements to them is so massive. All these other things are getting affected too. So you bring up a really good point. Yeah. No good news on this slide, I'm sorry to say. Next slide.
A lot of good information though you got.
Yeah, well, thank you. And it's a collaboration of a lot of stuff. And just all I ask is you take this stuff back and give it to your members. Let them know what's going on. Testing limitations. I will be quite blunt. The US has done an absolute crap job at testing. You might see that we've tested more people than any country in the world now. That might be true, but it took us January, February, March, April, May, almost 5 full months to get up there, where Germany, New Zealand, Norway, Denmark, South Korea, Australia, Canada, massively tested its population within a few weeks. And if you look at a time comparison of, say, mid-March compared to where the US was, we didn't do a good job. Not at all. We need to get testing out there at a higher rate than what we even are currently having it now. In fact, Harvard Medical School, and I will believe what Harvard Medical School said that we need to have 5 million tests a day in this country to allow us to go back to work safely. It's good because you're going to know who's got it and who doesn't, and you might have to retest. You might have to retest more than once, but you've got to do it. And we saw that the countries that did it at a massive scale and continue to do it are close to back to normalcy. And again, all those countries I mentioned already, Germany, South Korea, New Zealand, etc., they've done it. They've cracked the puzzle. And this isn't a big ask. We're not asking people to jump over a very high hurdle. So there's limitations in testing. The other thing that some states are doing, and you should be aware of, is that some states are combining positive COVID-19 tests with antibody tests. So what they're doing is they're putting those two tests together, and they're different things, and giving their residents a false sense of security that they're doing a lot of testing. No, they're not. They're two different tests. And on the issue of antibody tests, the most recent survey I looked at from the CDC said that up to 50% of antibody tests to tell if you've had the disease or not already are false. Oh. They're defunct, they're not valid. So we've got a lot of limitations on testing right now.
So Bernie, I also noticed that you said that the testing went back to January. And I've heard that there's reports that say that this thing has started even going back into late November, right?
Yeah, so this is going to take a while, I think, for the actual true scenario to come out. It's possible that they had folks that were infected in California in December, because there were reports from nurses and doctors that they saw some really bizarre infections that they thought was a really bad flu. So so that detective work on the epidemiologist end is going to take a while to do. And I think it's important that they close that gap so that we know. But it's possible that it was here that far back.
Yeah, because I just recall like even taking my daughters to the doctor back in December, and she had a cough that just would not go away, and they just gave her some bogus strep throat test and said that it was strep throat, and they just put her off and sent her away. And I had the same thing. They told me I had bronchitis, but it was like one of the worst coughs I've ever had.
Yeah.
And I, knowing for some of the instructors that were in the same building, I think we all had something in December, because it was terrible.
Did they give you antibiotics?
They did, but what they told me was that they would give me the same strep throat test that they gave my daughter, but it's not accurate. So how could they give my daughter that same test and say, okay, yeah, you tested positive for strep throat, but then tell me it's inaccurate?
Right. So I'm dipping my toe here in a pool that I only visit once in a while because I'm not a physician. But they do have different levels of tests for different diseases. So like for strep throat, they have a rapid test, which they can do like in 10 minutes right in the office. Then they have a longer test at the culture that they have to send out. And that's more accurate, and you usually get the results back in a couple days. They both need to be used in conjunction with each other. Because sometimes I've personally gotten a negative on the rapid test for strep, and then I get a call back, 48 hours later, oh, we just called you in a prescription for antibiotics because it comes back, you're positive. So those are some good things to consider. Now, think of this. We have known about strep throat and bronchitis for 100 years. And we're still trying to muddle through, doing the best we can, making our tests better for that, making our validity for the test better. So now try to imagine that applied to COVID-19, which is brand new.
Yeah.
And everybody, you're going to get me down a rabbit hole here, but if you just smoke on the pipe with me for a moment in Alice's Wonderland.
Pass it on, buddy.
All right. So the federal government has given some no-bid contracts to some organizations that probably shouldn't be doing some of this research and development. And I'll give you an example of the Battelle N95 disinfection system, which ended up being $600 million. I wouldn't even mind a 600th of that. And now I find out they don't work. So they were saying that this magical disinfectant machine is going to be able to disinfect your N95 disposable respirators up to 20 times. And now we have doctors and nurses in the field saying after 2 or 3, maybe 4 cycles of it, my mask is falling apart. We gave them 600 million of our tax dollars to make that thing, and it doesn't work. So we need to
there's some hands raised also.
What's that?
Just wanted to let you know there are some hands raised also.
And we're running at 12:03 right now, Bernie.
Okay, yeah, so I think we should, since we're at our time limit, we can pick up tomorrow on this slide, and we should be able to get through the module and a half left that we've got tomorrow without a problem within the 2 hours. But first, I don't want to end unless anybody's got any comments or questions that are hanging on.
Sean has his hand up, so I don't know if he already spoke or not.
That would be
Bernie,
Sean.
there's a CVS in my neighborhood that's going to start testing next week, have a drive-through test center. Is this recommended for anybody or just people who think they are sick?
So good question. So unfortunately, it's the Wild West. It's left up to states to decide how they're doing this. For instance, within my state, they opened up a an online platform where you could go and say you're in a certain high risk category and get a test no matter what. Now they're saying if you've been around anybody in large groups, you can go get a test. So CVS is probably going to have some qualifications for you to go and get that test. Ideally, what should happen is anybody who wants one should go and get one. And even more so, everybody should be encouraged by their states. Actually, let me go a step further, by the federal government to go get a test, everybody. But we're just not at that level. Some states are better than others, and some locations in states are even better than others. So you have to check with CVS to get the answer to that. So that's a very good question.
So, but is it something that I should do even though I've had 0 symptoms and all that stuff? In myself and my family, if it's available, should I just get tested because I can?
Yep, I would. So like I've been out in public, I go out twice a week. I wear an N95. I wash my hands as soon as I get back. I would still like to have a test. I've got asthma. 2 of my kids have asthma. The safest way for all of us to go back to work is to have constant wide testing available to everybody and to do contact tracing if somebody gets sick.
Right.
But what I would do, Sean, is see if your state has a portal online about testing. And if not, just call up that local CVS branch and say, hey, should I come get a test? These are my circumstances. And then if they say, well, we don't recommend it, say, well, can I anyway?
I'm in Massachusetts. I'm actually right down the street from you in Brentwood.
Oh, all right. All right. So knowing that you're in Massachusetts, which is one of the high hit states, I would like to go get one now, but I don't qualify.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep. Any other closing comments or questions?
You rock, Bernie.
Oh, gosh. Stop. You're going to make me blush.
It's very informative, man. Great presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Bernie.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Bernie.
Well, thanks for being open to hearing it, because that's what we need. And I hope that you can pass this on to your members, because that's what needs to happen. If I ascribe to the phrase worker empowerment through education. So if you can get this out to all your members and they can pass it to their families, I mean, we can create a movement here that can help everybody. All right.
Sean, if they let you go, let me know.
Okay.
This is Ken. I thank everybody for joining in today and being participative throughout the webinar here. And definitely, I just want to enhance on what Bernie said. Is it's really important for us to share this back to our membership. I mean, that's why we're instructors for. That's why they put us on staff at our district councils, is to be educated so we can educate our members. And this is a great way. It's I'm going to tell you, we're probably the only union out there that has an industrial hygienist at Bernie's level and the credential he has to share the information to us that we can share to our members. So we're really fortunate to have Bernie to do this for us. But I think it's our job now to really grasp this stuff, really learn this stuff, and portray that to our membership. I think that's the most important thing we can do. So I thank everybody, and then we'll do this again tomorrow at the same time.
Thank you. Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
See you all tomorrow.
Yep. See you guys.
Bring the margaritas. It's Friday.
Hey, Ken.
Yep.
You're aware that the NACE gave us the go-ahead. We're going to have a NACE class in Vegas about 2 weeks from Sunday.
A CIP?
Yeah.
Nice. So this will be the second one.
Yeah, it'll be the second one, third one for down there that we've hosted. Kind of different though. What they're going to have us do now is the host will do the blasting and coding of the panels, not the participants.
I think that's important because we have a transmission with the blast hoods.
Of course.
And it's almost like we need a blast hood for every participant unless we have a proper disinfectant station that disinfects them properly.
Oh yeah, that would be a nightmare. But anyways, we did get the green light yesterday.
Excellent.
Debbie Lee's actually going to be going down there to help Adolph out because, you know,